So at MACDC, we have the challenge of trying to articulate a story about community development that makes sense for Boston, Cape Cod, the Berkshires, Worcester, Lawrence, Newton, because we do believe that community development has a role to play in every single city and town, regardless of whether it's urban, suburban, or rural. But we came up with this sort of framework for thinking about community development. And it starts at the top with the idea of building communities. And we're going to talk about this in a few minutes. But it goes to what a few of you were talking about in terms of empowering local people, helping families and individuals who live in the neighborhood have more agency and power over their own lives, over the life of the community, encouraging people to get involved in the community and participate in the civic life and the civic decision-making of the community. I am constantly reminded of what one of your colleagues from Lawrence said to me once about the city of Lawrence, maybe 20 years ago, where every faction in the city had just enough power to stop anything from happening, but nobody had enough power to make anything happen or had the ability to build a consensus or a coalition to make something happen. And so there was this gridlock that just perpetuated cynicism and people not wanting to get involved, people just clinging to their power in their different places. And what the CDC sort of observed when it was first getting going, in I guess the late 90s this was, is the first thing we have to do is we have to work on the civic culture of this place. You know, before we build a single house, before we make a single loan, before we start running any kind of programs, we've got a lot of work to do to build a civic culture that functions. So I think a lot about that, and I think the CDCs can play a really important role in fostering that, not alone, obviously, always in collaboration with others, but that is a key piece. The community development field believes the built environment matters. It's not the only thing that matters, but I think that a core belief of our field is that your physical surroundings matter to the quality of your life and the opportunities you're going to have, starting with your home and having a safe, affordable home that you can count on, but also going to everything around that home, having a vibrant business district, having parks, having functioning transportation system and good schools. The built environment matters, and that's one reason why the CDCs focus so much on real estate development. But changing the built environment, improving the built environment isn't enough, as some others have said. If you improve the built environment, but everyone has to move out because they can't afford to stay, well, you really haven't done much to help those individuals, even if the place looks a lot nicer. So there has to be a focus on working with families and individuals to improve their lives. This often takes the form of financial empowerment classes, social services, youth programming, programs for elders. It can include homeownership education, entrepreneurship programs, a whole range of things to try to help people gain more economic security. And these things all connect to each other. None of these operate in a vacuum, and they reinforce each other in a virtuous circle. As people gain more economic stability, it's easier to participate in the civic life of the community, easier to get involved in advocating and fighting for improvements in the built environment and so forth. Just quick orientation just about the community development space. You know, many of you I think are associated with CDCs. Obviously, MACDC is very centered on CDCs. But, you know, we have to recognize that CDCs are just one of many players in the community development field. It's part of what makes the field interesting. It's one of the reasons why collaboration is a core skill set for any community developer, because as you go through your career, you're going to be working with people from all these kinds of organizations, and you may even find yourself working for some of these organizations over the course of a career. We see a lot of people moving between and among these different players. I'm not going to read this out. I think it's fairly self-evident. So, but what is a CDC? Well, in Massachusetts, we actually have a state law that defines the term. We are one of very few states. I think South Carolina might be the only other one that has an actual state law that says what a CDC is. And this is the definition that's in state law. This was written in 2010. It replaced a definition that was written in 1975 by Mel King, our namesake, who was a state rep at that time. And the definition that he wrote, and he and his colleagues, and it was signed into law by the governor, when we came around to 2010, we thought it was a little out of date. For one thing, it only allowed a CDC to operate in a low-income neighborhood. It required, you couldn't have, it had to be I see Patricia looking askance. Yes, that was, that was the idea at the time in the 70s, was these are organizations to build up and support low-income places. But as poverty has, migrated around the state, we see a need for it in every community. So we wanted to change that. There were some other, it was very prescriptive about how your board was set up. So anyhow, but this definition was very intentionally written to make it clear that community development can exist in any place, and that it is focused on economic opportunities. I've literally had people call me about little leagues and such, wanting to get certified as a CDC, and I love Little League, but it's not community development. Even though a CDC might sponsor a Little League team, that's not what makes it community development. The thing I want to call your attention to is we tried to write this sentence in a way in which local residents and businesses and stakeholders are the subject of the sentence, not the object of the sentence. That's very intentional, and I would encourage you as you write things to think about that. Nonprofits often talk about the people we work with as the object of our intervention. We are going to help them. And we wrote this to say, no, community residents are going to work together to implement programs and changes in their community. Makes for a slightly awkward English, but nonetheless, there was a philosophical point there. The law requires that CDCs have meaningful representation of the constituency on their board. Now that's kind of squishy. We didn't know what else to do because this looks different in a rural community and an urban community. We didn't want to create such a rigid structure that people just check the box and but don't really adhere to the core value. And the Department of Housing and Community Development is responsible for certifying whether a group meets the criteria. And this just goes into a little bit more detail about what it means to be a CDC. We have sometimes, this definition allows some room for debate, let's put it that way. There are organizations that have been certified where somebody might be like, really? And there's organizations that have not been certified that you might think qualify. We did not make it easy for DHCD.